And Kim, I'm going to let you have the floor in just a sec. And you also have a presentation too, right?
I can, or if we just want to have a conversation, either way, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, we can do a conversation. All right. Well, welcome to Experience Talks. It's our monthly conversation that we host at the INCubator the first Wednesday of every month. I'm Alexis Willis, the Director of Small Business and Entrepreneurship over at the INCubator, and I call it 127,000 square feet of startup community. We have over 40 founders in there right now who are chugging away and creating products and creating jobs for our community. And so speaking of our community, we have Kim today. Kim, can you pronounce your last name for a final time, and it'll be on record?
Yes.
Because I feel like it's different.
You'll probably never meet. I only know of one other family in town that has the same name as we do, but it's spelled differently. So almost every community we've ever lived in, we are the only ones of us, and it's pronounced Shumpert, just the way it's spelled. I went from Campbell to Shumpert, and I told my husband I must really love you to take that name.
I love it. Well, we have Kim Shumpert here with Chattanooga Women's Leadership Institute. And she's been in that role about the same amount of time I've been at the INCubator, about 3 years now, right? But I feel like you're just really getting started, with some juicy stuff. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to you so you can tell us what you're working on and where you're headed and what's new at CWLI.
Well, I think so much of what we do makes more sense when you really think about us as an institute, which is a little bit of a shift. We've always had the name Institute in our name, but we haven't always functioned that way. And so when you think about us as a true institute, what we are doing now makes a lot more sense. And so we have always been in the business of leadership. We want to see happen, our mission is increasing the leadership capabilities and influence of women, which put another way means that we want to see the talents of women elevated into more decision-making spaces in our companies and our communities. And so we have a series of leadership studies, which are smaller workshops. We have leadership tracks, which are more intensives that are annual, year-long typically, or at least 8 to 16 session intensives. And we have leadership luncheons that are community-based, so everyone can come and learn about issues that are relevant to women. And then each year we have a large impact dinner, and then this year we're adding a one-day symposium the following day. So we'll have a dinner on Thursday and a full conference on Friday to explore economic, social, and policy dynamics that relate to women. And if all of that programming change wasn't enough, we also are opening a new facility in the chamber. We'll actually be housed on the third floor of the chamber to serve as kind of a complement to what you're doing at the INCubator on a much smaller scale, but just for women. We want to provide a space that's a safe place for women to travel into downtown if they need to work. From the periphery, or if you've got a small business and you're ready to incubate that with us, we welcome you to do that. So that's kind of in a nutshell the big things that we've got going
on. That's a huge nutshell. And a lot bigger than, we've had previous conversations and one big one, it felt like a bunch of them because I've been telling everyone, Kim is my people. She is my people. She gets it. But I love that you're doing, it sounds like CWLI is expanding and being more, I love that you focus more on the institute side of it because I will admit that I thought CWLI was the tea and crumpet crowd and they're talking about all this money that they're raising in their free time because that's what all of us have. And I didn't really feel like it was my tribe, but I feel like with you at the helm of the organization that more women are going to see themselves in the offerings that you're putting out for the next, years to come.
I really hope that's true, Alexis. That's been so much of my heart for what we're doing. Representation is a really big word that means something different to almost everybody that you ask. And when we think about representation and inclusion, that means a whole spectrum. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because when I first came on, we had to have some really hard conversation around specifically what inclusion meant. And we acknowledged that we had done a lot to, diversify ourselves socioeconomically, generationally. We had not done the hard work that we needed to do to diversify ourselves racially. And we've worked to, sort of start at the board level with that. I mean, how can an organization be representative of Chattanooga if the board isn't even representative of Chattanooga? Mm-hmm. So that took a lot of work, and that's been a big part of what we've done the last 2 to 3 years. And now we've got the next phase of that, which is pushing it out into the community so that women like yourself and myself feel like we really belong in this, and that we are strengthening a middle class, even, that we are really strengthening and redefining what leadership looks like. A lot of women have found themselves in leadership positions based on a more traditional construct. And what we found over the pandemic is that traditional construct just doesn't work for everyone, and particularly women who are bearing the brunt of uncompensated domestic activity and cognitive labor and a lot of the leadership traits that rescued our economy and our nation during the pandemic. And we just feel like it's time to celebrate that. It's past time to celebrate that. So.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about women in the workplace. And I didn't really, I've worked for as long as I've been a mom, but my kids are always with me. But that was because the environments I were in, they kind of didn't mind. They just became a part of, my oldest just became a part of the landscape. She was, I would always say Boom was everybody's baby. So I could look up and she would be in someone else's office drawing on their whiteboard and things like that. When I had my second one and I was in a more structured environment, is when I actually felt the pressure of that construct, like the pressure to perform. What am I going to do about childcare if I have an after 5 event? Like, can I bring my baby strapped to my chest to a cocktail event? I did a couple of times, but you can't always do that. And unfortunately, everybody's not going to take you seriously if you're networking at an event, with a baby strapped to your chest. I wish they did more often, but it sounds like you're doing a lot of work to develop women. What other work are you doing to help change like the external perspective? Like, you and I get it. But if you were talking to another organization, one of the big ones around town, what would you say to them for them to consider?
So another project that we've really just begun the work on is a project that we call the 7. And it's essentially 7 best practices that we know work for attracting and retaining high quality female talent. And what we want to see happen are organizations and businesses adopting these 7 practices. And we want to celebrate businesses who, they become 2 certified or 3 certified, all the way up to 7 certified with us. And these are things like pay equity, right? We want to advocate for pay equity. We want to advocate for keeping and making flexible and remote working for men and women both. It's things like having an integrated promotion program where, Alexis, if you're ready to be promoted and you have your annual review, the way that typically goes is your manager sits you down and they tell you how your performance was over the past year. And there may be a little bit of goal setting, but is there a time where you're mandated as part of that to practice pitching yourself and why you should level up in your career? We want to make that a standard practice within companies, that people are mandated, because we understand that confidence is one of the things that women, that for whatever reason, women are deficient in. And so having that exposure and that experience helps you get the necessary feedback to know how to pitch for yourself the next time. And it grows your confidence for when you really are ready to level up to the next one and you get some constructive feedback. Mm-hmm. It's things like having a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. communication pause, where really what that means is that communication doesn't necessarily stop altogether, but that superiors don't reward or penalize subordinates if they don't return that email at 4 o'clock in the morning. So it places equal value on the person who returns the email at 4 o'clock in the morning with the person who's feeding a baby at 4 o'clock in the morning, right?
Oh.
And as long as we have those two different mentalities around who bears disproportionately the brunt of those activities, right? It's more disproportionate that women are the ones up who are feeding babies at 4 o'clock in the morning. And until there's some equity there, then women shouldn't be penalized because their male counterpart is up at 4 o'clock returning emails and looking like the go-getter, right? Mm-hmm. So again, some of this is just a shift in ideology around how we deal with this. And then one of the others is promoting child care matching expenses. So there's already an IRS construct. We've got a lot of chatter right now around how do we deal with this child care conundrum, which was really, I don't think we understood the gravity of the problem until the pandemic. Yeah. And so we want to see that businesses, rather than run out and set up a daycare at their facility or, give money to existing childcare facilities, that they put the money in the hands of the mothers and fathers who are making decisions about their children's early childhood education. Mm-hmm. So, that's a really easy way for them to do that is to do a matching program with employees around those caregiving expenses. And that's not just child care, it's elder care as well. Yeah. So those are a few of the ideas. And again, the 7 is our advocacy platform for that. And it's something that we've got the bones around it, but we've not pushed it out as much as we can. And we hope to maybe begin to do that this year or next year to really begin to have that community change around some of that.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I love the 7A to 7P. It could either be I'm up with the kids or I'm sending an email. It could be one or both,
Right. Right. But it's not that it goes into your file as, oh, he or she is such a great employee because they returned email, right? It's a neutral activity. It's you managing your time on a 24-hour schedule like we know most women do. Most women don't manage their schedule on a 9 to 5. So.
No, I remember having this conversation at an event that Christy was hosting. And I was like, I want you guys for the next breakfast to look around and see how many women are there. Because chances are at 7:30 in the morning, she's still shuffling the kids out the door to go to school. I was like, you're probably going to see a lot of men, older white men there because they have the wives at home taking care of the kids and doing the logistics of the family stuff so they can show up to the business stuff. And we're getting excluded. Our voices are getting excluded at that hour. And then maybe even after 5, if you don't, childcare, usually you have to pick up your kids by 5:30. So yeah, I love that. And Christy said, she's like, ever since you made that comment, forget who it was on the board, heard me say it. And she was like, he hasn't forgotten it. And I was like, well, good. Maybe you'll have breakfasts at 9 when we
right.
And we can enjoy it in peace and not feel, rushed and what have you. So
or divided between your two very important responsibilities, one of which you're compensated for and one that you're not. Mm-hmm. But it's time for us to place equal value on the domestic labor that women bear the brunt of. And we haven't monetized that. We haven't. There have been studies out there that say that, on average, it's a $75,000 a year job just to be a mother if mothers were paid for it. And I think that grossly is probably underestimated.
Yeah.
But it's, so it's time for us to really, and again, I would posit that those same skills are the exact same skills that we want in leadership within companies and communities. Because to your point, when those voices are heard at those levels, then the systems and the constructs begin to shift and we get more voices and better perspectives and better outcomes when we get diversity of perspective.
Yeah, so. I agree. Victoria was super excited about this talk too. So I want to make sure she has room to answer, to ask questions too. Do you have any yet, Victoria?
On the spot. I didn't prepare any questions. I'm sorry. We're running 2 events today, so I'm just a bit frazzled.
Well, I wanted to make sure that you had the room to say something to Kim because we both were super excited about having you on today. I want to get into some stats. Do you have any stats on how many women have shifted from the workplace to home, and some are still, well, their home is their workplace. But what has really happened data-wise? Like, do you have data about what really happened last year?
We know that, I'll kind of start locally. It was interesting when I was researching some of this, right before the pandemic happened, there happened to be a study that the Times Free Press published. Mm-hmm. And at that point, women comprised 50.4% of the job market.
Okay.
So over the pandemic, for the first time in a very long time, that number has dipped below 50%. So we're now hovering somewhere around 46 or 47%. So, you think on a really big national scale, a loss of about 4 to 6% of the workforce is a big deal. It's a really big deal. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting is that pretty much all of the gains that women have fought for over the last, say, 40 years were wiped out by this event. Mm. So women had really fought to become 50%. We kind of felt like the first milestone was just to become 50% of the workforce, which would give us the voice to then push for pay equity. Well, so you can imagine if we've lost that standing, then we've lost that leveraging, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one issue. And one article from February the 13th of this year says that women won't regain just what's been lost since the pandemic until about 2024, which is a good 2 years after men. Additionally, men and women left the job force at the same time, parents predominantly who left at the same time. Almost nearly all of the men in this one study have returned to work, whereas the women have not, almost to a 2-to-1 deficit. Mm. So women currently still have, it says that 80% of the job losses were women during the pandemic, and that women have been about a 2.4 million loss compared to a 1.8 million loss for men. So again, just that little bit, 4 to 6% loss that makes up for some of that, us dropping down below the 50%. So why is that? I mean, we can kind of point to, obviously it's childcare or caregiving in general, mm-hmm. but more than that, it's that, all of the systems that women, so you think about going to work, the systems that you have to have in place, right? And the more income you have, the more systems you can add to your dynamic, right? So you, at a baseline, you have childcare. As you get a little more income, you can have somebody clean your house. If you get a little more income, then maybe you free up some time in your schedule to be able to focus on self-care and health and wellness and some of those sorts of things. And so you see these women sort of at the highest echelon who have all of these systems underneath them. And to your point earlier, what's interesting is their male counterparts have a wife mm-hmm. who does all of that. Whereas a woman at that level has to outsource that, and a portion of her salary typically has to go towards all of those systems because she doesn't, statistically speaking, have a husband who is equal to that wife on the other end of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. So you just have all of these social constructs that we're not talking about. We have these social biases that we're just not discussing, and we're not working toward rectifying anything because, to be honest, some of the traditional model still works for some people. And so what is their incentive to change it? But the problem is it doesn't work. It's not effective for the economy as a whole. And it's certainly not as effective as it could be. When we see more women who are given the ability to improve their economic mobility, we actually see companies profit more from that. Mm-hmm. And so I can't figure out what the psychology is and the hesitancy around that. And that piece of it, the psychology is not uniquely male. It's men and women who have biases around shifting the construct. And so you'll hear all kinds of excuses. One of the main excuses that we heard before the pandemic was, well, remote work just won't work. We won't see people be productive. And the pandemic blew that myth out of the water.
Way out. Yeah.
Way out of the water.
Yeah.
And so that particular barrier, that excuse, if you're a woman now, there's no way that you now don't have the ability to go in and negotiate that for yourself. Mm-hmm. Because if you're somebody who can do it, but we got to teach you how to do that, right? We have to equip women to know how to do that for themselves. So what's interesting is because of these constructs, we're seeing 1 in 4 women are now considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce altogether because they're just like, I'm out. This is what my world showed me was expected of me, and I don't want to fight the machine. Yeah. And so that's where we come in as a third-party agency that is constantly collecting this information and translating it into a way that makes sense, that bridges the gap between the individual and the corporation, or the individual and community, and that sort of thing, and really begins to offer up solutions. Because we can say it in a way that is easier because we have the collective power of our membership, collective power of the data that we're collecting, from an easier perspective than you as an individual walking into your boss's office can do.
Yeah.
Right. So that's some of the data. Do you have any other specific questions that you're curious about that I might have some data around?
Was there any industry in particular that suffered the most over the pandemic?
Great question.
Women exiting the workforce?
So what most of the data proved was that women are overrepresented in lower paying jobs. So think service industry jobs, think of jobs that are predominantly female dominated, right? And so you think about even clerical jobs and, even nurse assistant type jobs or front office type jobs, any of those kinds of things that are really heavily overrepresented by women there are a lot of losses that we saw. And so that speaks to another dynamic around pay equity, right? If we can see more women improve in their economic mobility, then they stabilize their families. They're no longer overrepresented, and we have more equality. So there's still this really big gap in terms of the quality of jobs. And so even as these jobs come back online, they're not necessarily jobs that women want to take, because this is an opportunity, if we can find it, for them to level up a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to see happen, because women are a nucleus for social and economic change. If you really want to make big change a woman's life, because you're changing multiple generations with changing that one woman's situation.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Yeah. So that, I don't know what the answer is for that, but I think it's something that we've got to look at.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that those were the industries.
Yeah.
That they were sort of lower level. I hate to say lower level, but they weren't. It doesn't sound like a lot of C-suite and directors.
I like to say that a lot of times, and this is not a male. Men didn't create this. Women a lot of times have allowed ourselves to have suppressed wages because we don't negotiate for the actual worth of the job. Yeah, and there's a lot of information out, about know your value and know what the value of the position is. I get asked a lot to help with job descriptions and sort of the value of positions. And I always have to take my personal hat off and say, if I'm just looking at your organizational chart and your structure, mm-hmm. then the value of this position is X, regardless of gender. And we've got to eliminate conversations, even sidebar conversations around, well, maybe we should hire a woman because it would be cheaper, right? Woo! Some of that kind of talk. So
I cannot even believe people actually have that conversation, but I also believe it.
And I think it happens less now that we're more aware.
Yeah.
But I think we'd be kidding ourselves to say it doesn't happen at all. And mm-hmm. we as women have got to say, no, this is what I know the position should be worth to your organization. And here's why. By having me in this role, you're saving this, and this, for example. And so the compensation for that value should be X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Agreed.
But it's a lot in how we pursue the language. But a lot of times we're just so happy to have the pat on the back of being considered for any position, right?
Yeah. I'm just so happy to be here with you guys.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of fell into that a little bit earlier, maybe 10 years ago, but the me now is like, aren't you glad that you're here with me? Now it's different. You should be happy I'm here. All right, let's get the party started.
That's right. Let's get to work. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not an us versus them. I know it sometimes feels that way, but, women, and I think we've lost, I always say that there's this tension between empowerment and leadership. And, we are in the business of leadership. And so empowerment says, it is past time that I get what I deserve out of life. I've sacrificed and I've done all of this for everybody else. And here's what I am worth and my value. And that is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. But leadership recognizes that the landscape isn't where you are, and you might have to manage those desires to bring everybody over to this side of the conversation. So those two things are always going to have a push-pull relationship, kind of like we do with our daughters, right?
Yeah. A lot of pushing.
And so we have to have both. We have to have empowered women who are leaders. Yeah. And those two things go together, but they're also very different skill sets. Mm-hmm. And so when we see more on this side, and we see women being more comfortable in this space and vocalizing in a way that they can be heard, right? That's a very different kind of dynamic too. So I can be putting messages out to the world all day long about what I think should happen. Mm-hmm. And if those things aren't packaged in a way that they can be heard effectively, then I'm not leading.
Yeah.
So we have to be cognizant of that. And so that's kind of the space that we fill.
Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about another hot topic, which is since last year, is racial equity and how CWLI is tackling that conversation? It sounds like it's threaded through everything, just based on this conversation and things that you're doing with the organization. I will say that some of my hardest experience have been perpetrated by white women, which is, I will say, was another reason why I kind of I shied away from CWLI. I had a little bit of I don't know if I want to experience that kind of hurt. I don't want to put myself in a position to experience that kind of hurt again. I think one of the solutions is more community, more relationship, more opportunities for relationship. So that there's more one-on-one conversation like, hey girl, when you said that was kind of, or have you thought about considering this in your organization? I just feel like it doesn't have to be an us versus them, like what you said before. There is a way to have healthy and safe exchanges about it. Is CWLI going to create some of those safe spaces?
That is our intent, and it's and there's sort of the local way of doing that, and then there's the global way of doing that. Mm-hmm. And so one very specific project that we're working on right now that's in research and development, which I think a lot of people will look at us and be like, well, so how long are you going to have to be in research and development before you just get going on something? But if you want to really affect change the right way, then you have to incorporate all of the right voices into that mix of things. And so the first phase of this was to really work on our board and to really diversify our board. And, we have, I'm still not completely satisfied, but we have one of the most diverse boards in town, I realized. Mm-hmm. And which is not saying much, but it's saying a lot. And so that was the first step to even, because then you're not fighting the uphill battle of, well, why do we need to do this? Right. Mm-hmm. So because it's self-evident. Mm-hmm. So that was the first step. So then the second phase, I think that the George Floyd murder was a watershed moment for us.
Yeah.
That we brought our board together, and the sharing that happened during that one event, and the fact that we were able to put out an anti-racism statement so easily was really a testament to the work that had been done to that point. And I didn't realize it at the time, but we were one of the first organizations to put an anti-racism statement out. And it was one of those things that our board was ready to put a flag in the sand and be like, yeah, this is a non-negotiable. This is low-hanging fruit. And we received emails saying, thank you for your bravery and your courage around doing that. And so what was interesting was from that, we decided to take on and develop a leadership track around what we're calling civil engagement. Mm-hmm. And we want it to be one part civil discourse and the other part civic engagement. And so the first part is, teeing up, what does it mean to have civil discourse and intersection with people who are different and diverse? And what does intersectionality even mean? I sort of thought people understood what that meant, but we don't. We don't have an understanding. We don't have a connotation for it here.
It was a new term for me up until last year.
Okay, interesting. So it's so interesting. So, I grew up in my career in Little Rock and in Arkansas, and it's not as much of a foreign concept there. And I think it's because they have the history of the Little Rock Nine, and they have been working through this and wrestling, and it's just so much part of the vernacular there. It's, it's coffee shop conversation on any given day. But again, it's a much more equal community. Right? It's much more 50-50, whereas here I think it's more like 70-30. And so I think that's a problem, right? That's one issue. And so we've got to create space for intersectionality. And so that's the first part of the series, is understanding what civil discourse should look like, and then helping people identify how do they activate that into civic engagement? What does that mean? Does that mean shaping policy? Does that mean serving on boards? Does that mean, what does that look like for them? So the first thing we want to do, though, is we've got to develop the curriculum, and then we want to send our board through the curriculum, and we want to troubleshoot it. We want to, again, R&D the offering before we push it out into the public. So we're going to be working with a consultant to get that right. In the meantime, we have an affinity group called Civil Dialogues Across Differences, and we have a political science professor who runs that particular, and our affinity groups are special interest groups.
Okay.
And so that meets one evening a month. They may review a video and have discussion around it. They may have a book that they have discussion around. It's always something provocative. It's almost always something about intersectionality, about viewing the world from a lens other than your own. So that's kind of what we've got going on right now. Not a lot of people know about it yet. It's growing, but we want that to be intentionally small group, right? We want 10 to 15 individuals really leaning in and having the space to process and talk and share along those lines.
Yeah.
And so, when I came on, we had a diversity and inclusion committee. And what struck me about that committee at the time was that it seemed to be a totally sort of separate offering that wasn't integrated into the full spectrum of CWLI. So I kind of looked like the bad guy on the front end, because I did away with all of our committees, and I dissolved that committee among lots of others. We had 17 at the time, all doing work in all different directions. And so, but it was, it's pretty controversial to back off of that, but the thing was, it does no good to just check a box and say that you've got diversity and inclusion work happening if the very voices that need to shift the whole ideology for the entire organization aren't part of that conversation. And so, so that's the work that you don't go out and you don't write a press release about it. That's the stuff that just like this is the right thing to do. We have to do this. And people like yourself, and people like, there's lots of people who don't understand that work has been going on. And don't readily understand what goes into it. But in my estimation, that's what has to happen to get it right long term. I'm in it for the long term, not just to check a box to make somebody feel like we did it for a day. So so that's kind of where we are. Are there things that you think we ought to do that we're not? What would you like to see?
Well, our conversation was so refreshing to me. I talked about it for a couple of weeks afterwards to just hear. I was like, man, she's like really like, this is the work it takes to create a sense of belonging, which is usually the part that gets left out. There is a committee that's, and it's like, well, see what we're doing, or they prop someone up. They have a new addition to their title. They are now, human resources and diversity and equity, so then which makes great press releases, right? And so it appears that the work is being done, but internally, if you just like pull the curtain back, you realize that the other pieces of the work aren't getting done. And so I love to hear that you were like, yeah, this is kind of messy, but we're going to scratch all of this. And Because what ended up happening is that you were laying the groundwork for now. And I'm like, she's just getting started. Y'all ain't even ready. Y'all ain't even ready. Like what you see now has been 2 years in the work. Y'all ain't even ready. And it seemed like last summer and the pandemic and everything created the Kairos moment for you to like, just be like, ta-da, here is how we're going to impact change. And I love, this work towards policy and practice. I feel like, if you want to keep someone boxed in or oppress anyone, you put a policy in place. Mm-hmm. It's usually policy, practice, law, right? And so the fact that you're like, hey, can we just like take a look at these and,
we had to back up and say, so, everything that you're describing is the what, but we had to deal with the why.
Yes.
We say we are doing this because this is who we are. Mm-hmm. And we had to make it who we are before we could say that, right? And we're still not entirely there, but we're a whole lot further down the road than we were.
Yeah.
And when it is who you are, you can't not be who you are.
Amen.
That's why that work has to be done. I love how you put it, a sense of belonging, but more importantly, it's that's who we have to be. It's not me just placating you to make you feel good and feel like you belong. It's that you genuinely, because you're going to see through me. You're going to see through if I don't do the things that not just I can make you feel belong, make you feel like you belong all day long. But if I haven't done something to empower everybody else in my stratosphere to help you feel like you belong and for that to just be standard and we don't even think about it and it's normalized, then I haven't done my job.
Yeah.
And so, it's been, and I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about, it's been one of the most challenging things that I've dealt with in this role over the last 3 years, because there's so much confusion. There's so much misunderstanding. There's so much divisiveness around race equity right now. And there's equal work that needs to be done in that space as there is with women. One of the things that I came into this role, I said, we've done a pretty good job of describing what we're against, but who's doing the work of describing what we're for? So if not this, then what? Mm-hmm. And that's our job, we feel like, is to define what women are for. And I feel like the same work has to be done in the racial equity piece. And I want somebody out there to say, hey, these are the things that you need to be doing to help this community of people who feel disenfranchised, feel like they have a place to belong and that they get to be full participants in their lives, in our lives. It's not just you or me. You are a part of my life now, right? I mean, you're my sister now because
I ain't going nowhere, Kim. I just want you to know. So you stuck with me.
Good. I like it. So
well, I love that there's a place where women can be more developed. They can look for opportunities to be developed as leaders. Like we can find countless things on mommy stuff, but as a leader, I know I have always craved that, and I usually get it from books and it's not even so much like having a mentor all the time. Like I think that, there are times where you feel like, okay, I need someone to mentor me through this season, like my first year as a director, but also just having like access to women who've just been there, done that. And like, and if they're in a season that I want to get to, like, I want to be, how do I get to be the woman that writes the big checks, or how do I get to be the woman that, how do I choose the right committee, to get involved in and then work my way to a board seat, I had always craved that, and I love, it sounds like CWLI would be a great spot to, to tap into.
That's what we're working toward. And, we want women to have about a 7-year cycle of growth with us. It's not short-term work. We've got entry points and we've got stuff that'll scratch your itch for a day, but we really want to build something here to where you are part of a community that is uniquely designed for all of the seasons that you find yourself in, no matter what point you find us. And that's what the Legacy Center that we will open at the Chamber will do as well. We understand that women, so part of this recovery effort, so we have all of these displaced women, right, who are leaving the workforce. Well, I mean, you can imagine that a lot of them are probably going to start looking at their own businesses because they need to make something that works for them, right? Yep. What they had before didn't. Now it's an opportunity to do that. So we want a place that they can be part of a system with the chamber where they can access venture capital, where they can have those kind of conversations and develop business, because women are grossly underrepresented in venture capital investment. Yeah. And so again, those are all conversations that we need to be having, that we need to be talking about and thinking through. And, you know, awareness is just the first key. Like, we want people to say, you know, where is a woman in this mix? You know, at a pitch competition, where are the women? How are we pulling this in? Let's be intentional about that. And I hate that we have to be intentional about that, but we do.
But we do, yeah. Yeah, and it's not always going to be like that. As I found that with even like getting more Black and brown folks in different spaces is like, you know, I hate that I got to ask, but like, where we at, you know, as judges and as participants in this competition or whatever, you know, it doesn't always have to be like this. And don't think I'm not trying to indict you, but I am calling it out so that we can change it, you know? So yeah, I don't think it has to always be like that, but we need to say it.
Well, and it doesn't just need to be our women of color or people of color who are doing that. I need to do that, right? I am doing that for my agency. Every time I am calling us back to, where's the representation? Here's our goal, and what does this look like? Mm-hmm. And now I'm beginning to have that echoed back to me. So now the people who are leading on certain committees, they've heard it out of my mouth enough that they're like, we can't take this to Kim unless we know we've covered these boxes. I just had a conversation today. Because we're thinking about impact later this year. And you know, they know, you better not bring this to me unless you thought it through.
Yes, I love it. I want that kind of rep. Don't be bringing that to Alexis if you ain't getting it all. Is it airtight? Oh, yes. She's not gonna look at it yet. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Do your homework. And again, it's just it all boils down to treating people the way they ought to be treated. Yeah. Right? People deserve to be full participants in their lives. I deserve to be able to go home and be fully present for my kids. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm in a season where that's not always possible. And I've got a girl, you know, I've got one daughter who's going to be a senior in high school next year. And I feel like I'm under the gun to get a lot of work done, you know, by August, so that I can really enjoy her senior year of high school, you know, and so that means that because I'm motivated that way, I got to really delegate, and I got to really prop some other leaders up to do the big work that we're talking about. But if that's a value to me, then it has to be a value to my board. I have to model it so that it becomes a value for you and your job, and Victoria and you and your job, and Crystal, you and your job, right? We have to model the kind of behavior that we expect everybody else to have where it comes to female talent. Mm-hmm. And we deserve that. That's the empowerment piece, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we can't be in competition if that's the truth. Mm-hmm. Two things can't be true. I can't be in competition and feel threatened about you coming to take my job and be a leader. I can't, you know, I have to be able to delegate, and I have to be able to lift other leaders in my stratosphere up to do the work the way that we envision it being executed. Mm-hmm. So it's fun work. I enjoy it. It's hard. It's a lot of conversations, you know, which clearly I have a lot of trouble talking. So I think I put me in just the right spot.
You and me both. They're probably like, here they come. Yeah. Let me see. I'm going to check our time. Victoria, did you come up with it? Oh, it's already 12:49.
I told y'all that y'all would have plenty to talk about. There's a lot more. Like, there's the whole, like, your whole. It's okay. Your whole part about like cognitive labor that we talked about last time, I wanted to talk about a little bit, but if we don't have time, that's okay too.
We absolutely have.
I know we're kind of out. Yeah. Crystal, do you have any questions or anything? I love the raccoon image too, by the way. If not, then
I will unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Oh yes, there you are.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm Crystal Kyle. I am currently, I starting a business, starting a digital asset management and photography business with my brother that will be called Light Farm Photography on what used to be an old family farm up in Harrison. But I am also, this is kind of my debut after the pandemic and after really about a decade of blowing up my career to get out of New Orleans. And I worked for almost 20 years at the Newcomb College Center for Research on Women and then the Newcomb College Institute through Katrina and after Katrina, and burned out and bailed out. So I've been back in Chattanooga for a while, earn another graduate degree so I can be a digital curator. And I'm just curious too. And again, I agree with you, Alexis. I learned a lot today about the Women's Leadership Institute that I didn't know. Chattanooga really kind of contrasting with New Orleans. It's still such a top-down city in some ways. Mm-hmm. And it seems though like we're trying to everybody meet, and that's cool. So I'm finding that to be really useful. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all goes for women as we come out of the pandemic, because caregiving is really, really heavy. I really had to make a choice. Do I stick my parents someplace that will make them miserable and pretty much sell all our family assets, accumulated wealth, to do something else? Or is this my job? And that was my job. So I'm putting all that back together now. So I'm just kind of checking in and have enjoyed today's conversation. So
good.
So nice to meet you, Crystal. And I'll tell you, I will say some of the best life experience that I've had for what I do now and why I do what I do was that I worked the Katrina relief with the federal government. I went down as a part of a federal government cadre the day after it happened. And what I discovered, I worked for the Social Security Administration at the time, and what I discovered, sort of, aha moment for me through that, was that it didn't matter how much money I put into the hands of people who were suffering through that. If they didn't have a way to activate it and make their life and the person next to them's life better, if I wasn't able to also teach that and build that in, then I wasn't doing any kind of real service to them. Mm-hmm. And so that's been kind of the common thread of my career ever since then, is equipping people, and I love it. So thank you for that story.
Transformative experiences do transform. And the pandemic, it's weird. It's like Katrina was almost the long Katrina event, which went on is still going on in some ways, but really intensely for about 7 years after that. It really has been my frame for understanding and putting the pandemic in context. So, whoa.
We were talking earlier about how we've got to give our society space to process all of this. In fact, kind of going back to Katrina, another project that we started, a group of us nonprofits got together in the community to work to kind of stave off over-resourcing of certain agencies within the nonprofit sector to the detriment of the economic development of the sector as a whole. So, for example, organizations like ours, we weren't out on the front lines feeding people. Therefore, we weren't able to get access to some of the same funding that, say, a food bank would have been able to get access to. And so then you have this compression issue where you've got a whole sector that employs nearly 10% of our population that could possibly be on the brink of collapse. And what Katrina taught me, you remember all of the trailers and the water and all the supplies that came in. And by that point, so many of the citizens had been displaced that all of those resources just sat there unutilized and mismanaged. And so we had this glut of resources that if we had listened to the full spectrum of the landscape and we'd had the right people thinking about it, could have been activated in a different way. And so when the pandemic hit, that experience, prompted me to try to figure out who was doing that work, only to discover nobody was. And so a group of us got together and built a coalition around it. And we've done some decent work. It's not where it ought to be, but Katrina taught me so much, and this is so similar to that, and we've got to stop and take stock before we just open right back to that top-down model that you were talking about. We can't go back to that.
And it's the big problem in Katrina too was finding a way for organizations to listen to locals. Mm-hmm. I was very deeply involved in collaboration with V-Day. Lord, won't go into that, but like people wanting to know, like, what do you need? Like, what do you need that we can give you immediately? And the smartest thing anybody said in that, like maybe the first 2 or 3 months after Katrina, when people were spread out and like just kind of everybody out of our minds, and people who could be back home were there trying to work, was a social worker, a wonderful social worker with a gender-based violence, domestic violence agency, pushing her baby in a baby carriage, and just saying, looking at this woman and just saying, we do not know yet. Mm. And I keep thinking about that, like, you know, everybody's like, what do we do? What do we do? We got to do something, like relief. And so important, but having our mechanisms in place to be able to listen to people and local is, it's like local, think global, act local. Figuring out how to listen to our community, which is always, I think, social media and face-to-face conversations, and maybe our use of social media and conferencing even like this to continue with these conversations. I think this can be so transformative for women. Like, there's no way I would have gotten downtown today because just out of laziness and other things to do, but it's been awesome tuning in for an hour. So
cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you did too.
Yeah, it's nice to meet y'all. So I'll be quiet now because we're wrapping
up. Well, Kim, do you have any like final thoughts? Like, what is there something we need to keep on our radar? Is there an upcoming workshop or talk that you're doing?
So we're actually going to start opening back up. We just had a leadership study yesterday, and if you're interested, our leadership studies are available online at cwli.thinkific.com, and that's just Thinkific the way it sounds, THINKIFIC, so thinkific.com, and I can send you that link. And so we archive all of that material, and people can access it on demand. And so if there's anything that you want to access, you can do that. But beginning in June, we're actually going to have a leadership. So to your point about intersectionality, we actually are bringing Vicki Clark. She'll kind of join us remotely, but we are going to have a live leadership luncheon at the Doubletree. Mm-hmm. And that is, I believe it's June 24th. And the topic is a call to intersection. And so one of the neat things that Vicki did was she got to work on a Facebook platform and created a safe space after George Floyd for people of all backgrounds. And she moderates some amazing conversation from all perspectives. No question is off limit. And she truly created a space for genuine intersection for people to speak and be heard, and for it to be a respectful platform. And so it was a real interesting offering. And she would have these sessions every Thursday night where people could just process what had happened and walk through it together. So, and you know, in particular, some of the most fascinating stuff that happened was white people were able to ask questions about, well, you know, if I'm trying to do this, but obviously this thing that I'm doing is not right. So what do I do? Which I think is a common, we get that analysis paralysis, and so we don't do anything. And so she opens it up.
That kind of safe space is really important too. I found myself having a lot of those conversations in my inbox and over tea and coffee, because they do need a place to process, like, whoa, like, I know this is tragic, or hey, I read this article and I saw myself in it, how do I change? You know, definitely that kind of space is needed. That's cool, on the calendar. So how does someone get involved with CWLI?
So the best place is our website. Just go and check us out. We have so much going on at any given time. That's the best spot. But you'll learn, even just on our homepage, you'll learn kind of how we are constructed. We have 3 main areas, which are educate, collaborate, and elevate. And so our educational tracks are all around those leadership tracks that I talked about at the top of the hour. Collaborate. We offer quarterly connects, which are our quarterly networking opportunities, and we have one of those coming up in June as well. Mm-hmm. And then Elevate is more of our advocacy platform and the Legacy Center, really trying to elevate women into decision-making spaces and putting things in place that help that to happen.
Cool.
So yeah, so just check out cwli.org.
All right, will do. Thank you, Kim.
Thank
you. We ran out of time again. Like I think this happened last time. I appreciate you, and I will be in touch. And looking forward to getting more involved with you and seeing your face around the chamber building.
Yes, I hope to be around a lot more now. I'm excited. For y'all to get back in the office too. Thank you for having me today. It was nice to meet you, Crystal, and good to see you, Victoria and Alexis, again, and whoever else may watch this in the recording.
Okay, cool.